cabin air was cool, carrying the faint hum of the engines as Flight 237 pushed through the late evening sky. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of orange and violet fading into blackness outside the oval windows. Most passengers had already settled into their seats, the quiet shuffle of bags and murmurs of conversations slowing into the rhythm of a night flight. In seat 17A, a girl no older than 16 sat pressed against the window, her face half hidden by her hoodie. She looked small, almost swallowed by the oversized seat, her dark eyes scanning the clouds outside as though they held answers no one else could see. To the flight attendants, she was just another kid traveling alone, a teenager with a ticket, a passport, and nothing out of the ordinary. They'd seen dozens like her, students, children of divorced parents, young dreamers heading to visit relatives. Nothing about her seemed remarkable, except maybe how calm she was. While others fidgeted with their phones, sighed at delays, or dozed with travel pillows, the girl in 17A sat utterly still, her breathing steady, her gaze fixed outward. She hadn't spoken much since boarding. Just a polite thank you when the attendant checked on her, a small nod when offered juice. She seemed self-contained, an island in the sea of passengers, and if anyone noticed her, they forgot her just as quickly. But 30,000 feet above the ground, appearances were fragile things. As the aircraft leveled into cruising altitude, a sudden jolt rattled the fuselage. Overhead bins clicked, a few passengers gasped, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've hit a patch of turbulence. Nothing to worry about. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the light is off. Thank you." The reassurance worked for most. Conversations picked back up, earbuds slid in, pages turned. But in 17A, the girl's hands tightened on the armrest. Not out of fear, the opposite. Her eyes sharpened, calculating, as though turbulence wasn't random to her, as though she knew exactly what it meant. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaled, and whispered something so soft no one around her could hear. A name. Moments later, she pulled the hood lower over her face and leaned back, letting the drone of the engines mask her thoughts. Across the ocean, at a military airbase, radar screens flickered with dots of light representing aircraft traffic. Controllers sat at their consoles, eyes flicking between blips, numbers, and the endless streams of data pouring in. Everything was routine until one junior officer frowned at his screen. "Sir," he called, leaning closer to the radar. "I've got something odd here. Flight 237, transponder squawk changed for about 30 seconds before it stabilized again." His superior leaned over. "Could be a glitch. Civilian transponders do that sometimes." "Maybe," the officer said, still staring at the data. "But the code it flickered to, it wasn't random. It was a military distress identifier, one that hasn't been used in years." The older man's eyes narrowed. "You sure?" "Yes, sir. That was enough to set off a quiet ripple across the control center. Calls were made. Protocols were triggered. Within minutes, the command reached the Air Force. An anomaly on a civilian jet. Standard response: send an escort to verify. 2 F-22 Raptors roared into the night, cutting through the darkness with afterburners that lit the runway like fire. The pilots, call signs Viper and Ghost, climbed into the sky, banking toward the blip of Flight 237. Inside the passenger jet, life continued in its fragile normalcy. People sipped sodas, scrolled through phones, shifted in their sleep. No one knew that steel predators were racing through the clouds toward them. No one, except maybe the girl in 17A. She sat straighter now, her eyes glinting as if she sensed them before the radar did. Her fingers tapped lightly against her knee, a rhythm, a signal only she understood. By the time the captain came back over the intercom, his tone a little tighter, she was already braced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed by air traffic control to maintain current altitude and heading. Nothing to be concerned about, just routine procedures." But the passengers sensed it, something unspoken in his voice. Nervous whispers spread through the cabin. Why was he tense? Why was the plane holding steady so long? Outside, the girl knew the Raptors had already closed in. At 30,000 feet, the two fighter jets flanked the commercial airliner, sleek silhouettes against the stars. Their presence was both protective and menacing. In the cockpit, Viper and Ghost scanned the plane, their instruments alive with data. "Flight 237, this is U.S. Air Force Interceptor. Respond immediately. The captain fumbled with the radio, his voice steady but puzzled. Air Force Interceptor. This is Commercial Flight 237 out of London, bound for New York. What seems to be the issue? Flight 237, we detected an anomaly on your transponder. We need you to verify your passenger manifest and maintain current course. The captain's silence lasted too long. He knew something wasn't right. Passengers had begun to notice the faint shapes outside the windows, whispers spreading like wildfire. Are those jets? Why are they here? In 17A, the girl finally exhaled. She reached into the pocket of her hoodie and touched a small, worn patch sewn into the lining. An emblem, hidden from sight, but powerful in meaning. She had hoped this flight would pass unnoticed. She had hoped to remain just another face in the crowd. But the moment the F-22s appeared, she knew hope was over. One of the flight attendants noticed her stillness, her gaze not on the jets, but on the horizon. The attendant smiled nervously, trying to lighten the tension. It's okay, sweetheart. Just a precaution, I'm sure. The girl looked up, her voice quiet but certain. They're not here for the plane. They're here for me. The attendant blinked, startled. What do you mean? But before the girl could answer, the intercom crackled again. This time it wasn't the captain's voice. It was a hard, commanding tone. Passenger in seat 17A, identify yourself. The cabin froze. Dozens of eyes turned at once, following the seat numbers until they landed on the small figure by the window. Gasps echoed, murmurs broke out. A child? Why would fighter pilots call out a child? The girl's pulse quickened, but her face betrayed no fear. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed her hood back, revealing sharp features framed by messy hair. Her gaze locked on the window, where the faint outline of an F-22 shadowed them. Her lips parted, and though the words were soft, they seemed to reverberate through the cabin, carried by something heavier than sound. My name, she said, is Echo. The reaction was instant. On the other end of the radio, the F-22 pilots went silent. In the cockpit, the captain's face drained of color. Passengers looked at one another in confusion, not understanding, but the Air Force did. Because Echo wasn't just a name. It was a call sign, one buried deep in classified files, one tied to missions never spoken of in public, one that, if spoken aloud, could change everything. The girl in 17A wasn't just a kid. She was the reason the Raptors had been scrambled. And now, the world 30,000 feet below would remember a name they thought had been erased. The silence after she spoke stretched across the cabin like a storm front. Passengers stared at her, confused, whispering to each other in hurried tones. Some laughed nervously, dismissing it as a child's imagination, but others felt the tension, the heaviness that seemed to fill the air. In the cockpit of the F-22, Viper's hand hovered over his radio switch. His breathing had gone shallow. Did she say Echo? Ghost in the second Raptor answered, his voice tight. That's affirmative. I heard it too. Static filled the line for a beat before their operations commander came through. Confirm identification. Passenger 17A claims Echo as call sign. Confirmed, Viper said, his voice low. But sir, she's a kid, maybe 16. On the other end, the command center erupted into hushed chaos. The name Echo had been classified, buried in records that even most military officers would never see. Echo was not supposed to exist anymore. And if she did, she wasn't supposed to be on a civilian flight, alone, heading toward American airspace. Inside the plane, the captain received a scrambled message through his headset. The Air Force wanted passenger 17A secured. Now. He glanced nervously toward the cabin door, his co-pilot reading the look instantly. We can't exactly restrain a kid in front of 200 passengers, the co-pilot whispered. She's not just a kid, the captain replied grimly. Back in row 17, the girl Echo kept her eyes fixed on the jet outside. She could feel their gaze on her even through the cockpit glass. They were waiting, testing her, trying to decide if this was some kind of mistake. She reached up and pressed her palm lightly against the window, as if signaling back to them. The gesture sent another wave of whispers through the passengers around her. A businessman leaned over to his wife. What's going on? Why would they care about her? Echo ignored the stares. Her mind was elsewhere. On the mission she thought she'd left behind. On the people who had trained her, used her, and then abandoned her. She had run from that world, carved herself into someone new, someone normal. But the Raptors outside proved that the world she ran from had found her again. She closed her eyes and memories rushed in. The sterile walls of underground hangars. Men in uniforms with no names, only ranks. Endless drills that tested her endurance, her intelligence, her instincts. And the voice, the commanding officer who had given her the call sign Echo because she was meant to repeat, to reflect, to carry messages no one else could. A living cipher, a human weapon disguised as a child. But she wasn't their weapon anymore. Passenger 17A, the intercom boomed again, this time directly from the Air Force channel. This is not a request. Identify your clearance code immediately. Passengers jumped at the sudden command, their confusion deepening into fear. Some pulled out phones recording the scene, though the flight attendants tried to stop them. The atmosphere on board shifted from nervous curiosity to alarm. Echo's jaw tightened. She spoke softly but clearly, so the microphones would pick it up. Clearance code. 6 Delta 49er. The cabin gasped. The words meant nothing to them, but the tone, the authority in her young voice unsettled them. In the Raptors, Viper swore under his breath. Ghost muttered, "It's real. That's a valid sequence." "God help us." Back at the control center, the room went dead quiet. Then chaos. Officers scrambled, orders flew, phones rang. The chain of command was alert now, all the way to the Pentagon. "Maintain escort," came the order to the F-22s. "Do not engage." Repeat, do not engage. This situation is above classification. The fighters held formation, shadows guarding the airliner as though it carried a head of state, not a teenager. Inside the plane, the captain finally left the cockpit, face pale, voice strained as he addressed the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a technical matter that requires coordination with the U.S. Air Force. There is no danger. I repeat, there is no danger. Please remain seated and calm." It was the kind of speech designed to pacify, but the cabin was already buzzing with fear. Passengers glanced at Echo, some scooting away, others staring openly. A mother clutched her child tighter. An older man muttered about conspiracies. Echo didn't flinch. She'd been trained for this, for scrutiny, for silence, for survival under pressure. What she wasn't prepared for was the anger that simmered in her chest. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted the Air Force to know she was alive. And yet here they were, dragging her back into the spotlight. A boy in the aisle seat next to her finally spoke, his voice breaking the tension. Who are you really?" Echo turned her gaze to him, her eyes far older than her years. "Someone who was never supposed to exist." The word sent a chill through him, and he leaned back, wishing he hadn't asked. Meanwhile, the Air Force scrambled to decide what to do. Bringing Echo into U.S. airspace was risky, but diverting the flight, intercepting her mid-air, it risked exposure, panic, chaos. High-level voices debated, argued, shouted. In the end, one voice cut through. "Bring her in," the general ordered. "She's coming to us, whether she wants to or not." The fighters relayed the instruction to the captain. The plane was to continue to New York, with military escort the entire way. Hours ticked by as the passengers sat in fearful silence. Echo barely moved, her mind a storm of calculations. She knew what awaited her on the ground: interrogations, isolation, perhaps even disappearance. She'd been through it before. She wouldn't go back. She reached into her hoodie again, her fingers brushing the emblem sewn inside. A symbol no one on board recognized, but one the Air Force knew too well. When the plane finally began its descent, the tension reached breaking point. Flashing lights could be seen on the tarmac below. Military vehicles lined the runway. The passengers whispered in panic, some praying aloud. The captain's voice trembled as he gave final instructions. "Ladies and gentlemen, upon landing, please remain seated. Authorities will be boarding the aircraft for security procedures." As the wheels screeched against the runway and the plane slowed, Echo's heart hammered. She looked out at the armed vehicles waiting. She could almost see the faces of the men in suits, waiting to drag her back into shadows. The boy next to her whispered again, unable to help himself. "What's going to happen to us?" Echo turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable. "Nothing," she said softly. "They don't want you. They only want me." The engines wound down. The plane came to a halt. And in the heavy silence that followed, the boarding stairs clanged against the fuselage. Then the door opened, and the world of 200 passengers held its breath. Men in black suits filed in, flanked by armed soldiers. Their eyes swept the cabin until they landed on her. A girl in a hoodie, a child in seat 17A. The leader spoke, his voice cold. "Echo, you're coming with us." The passengers gasped again. Some clutched their phones tighter, others froze in fear. Echo stood slowly, every eye on her. For a moment, she looked small, fragile, just a teenager caught in something too big. But then she lifted her chin and the strength in her gaze returned. "I told you," she said quietly. "I'm not Echo anymore." But the men didn't care. They stepped forward. And the cabin, the passengers, the entire plane sat paralyzed as history shifted around them, 30 feet above the runway. The aisle felt impossibly narrow as the men in black advanced. The other passengers shrank away, pressing into their seats as if afraid even to brush against Echo. The girl in 17A didn't flinch. Her hands hung at her sides, her eyes unwavering as the lead agent stopped before her. "You've been off the grid for a long time," he said. His tone was smooth, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed unease. "The program thought you were gone, dead." Echo tilted her head slightly. "That's what I wanted them to think." The agent's eyes hardened. "It doesn't matter what you want. The program doesn't end, Echo. You don't get to disappear." The other passengers looked on, bewildered. To them, it was surreal, watching a teenage girl confronted like a fugitive, treated with the weight usually reserved for war criminals. Some began recording again, ignoring the flight attendants' frantic gestures to put phones away. "I told you," Echo said evenly. "I'm not Echo anymore. I'm just a girl on a plane. You should let me go." The agent gave a thin smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We both know it's not that simple. You carry information no one else has. Codes, protocols, memories of missions buried deeper than most generals ever see. You were designed to be an Echo. You can't pretend to be silent now." Her chest tightened. She hated that word, designed. She hadn't chosen it, hadn't wanted it. She had been born like anyone else, but molded, reshaped, drilled until her instincts weren't her own anymore. They had built her identity, and then they had expected her to carry it forever. Not anymore. Behind the agents, the soldiers tightened their grip on their weapons. The passengers' whispers grew frantic. "Is she dangerous? What did she do? Why would the military want a child?" The boy in the aisle seat, who hadn't taken his eyes off her, leaned forward, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. "Don't let them take you." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. But something in his words sparked the smallest flicker inside her, a reminder of why she had run in the first place. The agent extended his hand. "Come quietly and no one gets hurt." For a moment she considered it. Going with them might keep the passengers safe. It might avoid a scene. But she knew what awaited her beyond that door. Restraints, interrogation, a return to the life she had bled to escape. And she had promised herself she would never go back. In one swift motion, she stepped sideways, her small frame slipping past the agent's reach. Gasps erupted across the cabin. The soldiers moved instantly, but Echo was faster. Her training had been carved into her muscles, into her reflexes. She ducked low, darting into the narrow aisle with the fluidity of someone far beyond her years. Passengers cried out as she moved, some shielding their children, others frozen in shock. The soldiers shouted, but the lead agent snapped, "No shots fired! Too many civilians!" Echo used the chaos to her advantage, weaving between rows, knocking a tray cart into the aisle to slow pursuit. Her heart hammered, but her face remained calm. She had no weapon, no allies, only her instincts. Reaching the emergency exit over the wing, she stopped. Passengers near the row shrank back, terrified of her intent. She pressed her hand against the cold handle, testing it. Could she? At this altitude, it was impossible. The plane was still rolling slowly toward the terminal, surrounded by flashing lights. But she didn't need to open it. She just needed to send a message. She turned her head toward the window. Outside, the F-22 Raptors still flanked the plane, their sleek forms gleaming under the runway lights. She lifted her hand and tapped the glass twice, then once more. A rhythm, a signal. In the cockpit of one Raptor, Viper stiffened. "Did you see that?" Ghost answered. "Yeah, code pattern." "That's not random." Viper's gut twisted. She's trying to communicate. And the pattern wasn't just a signal, it was a warning. Inside the plane, the agents finally caught up, blocking the aisle at both ends. The lead agent's voice was tight with frustration. "Enough, Echo, this isn't a game. You can't outrun us." "Not here." Echo turned, her eyes sharp, unyielding. "You don't get it, do you? You're not the ones I'm running from. You're not the danger here." The agent froze. "What are you talking about?" She opened her mouth to answer, but then the cabin lights flickered, once, twice. The hum of the engines wavered, a shiver running through the aircraft's frame. Passengers screamed. The soldiers looked around, tense, and Echo knew. "It's already begun," she whispered. The agent grabbed her arm roughly. "What do you mean? What's begun?" But before she could answer, the captain's strained voice cut through the intercom. "Attention passengers, we've been instructed to hold position. Air traffic control reports a systems anomaly affecting the terminal grid. Please remain seated." The announcement cut out, the speakers hissing with static. Then silence. Echo's blood ran cold. She recognized the signs. A systems blackout, a coordinated breach. And if her instincts were right, the anomaly wasn't random. It was deliberate. Someone was using the distraction of her capture to infiltrate deeper. "This isn't about me," she said, her voice low but urgent. "It's about what I know. They're here because of what I carry in my head, and if you keep me locked up, you'll never see it coming." The agent's grip loosened, just slightly. Doubt flickered across his face. But before he could decide, a deafening roar filled the air outside. Another aircraft, black, angular, silent until now, swooped over the runway, its lights off, its presence sudden and menacing. The Raptors broke formation instantly, alarms screaming in their cockpits. Unknown craft! Bearing down on the civilian airliner, the runway descended into chaos. Sirens wailed, soldiers on the ground scrambled. And inside the cabin, passengers screamed as the shadow of the unidentified plane passed over them. Echo tore free of the agent's grip. "They've come for me," she said. "And if you don't let me handle this, everyone here is going to die." The agent's face was pale now, caught between disbelief and fear. He looked at her, not as a child, not as a runaway, but as the very thing they had made her, a weapon. "What do you need?" he asked hoarsely. Echo met his gaze, her expression steely. "A secure channel to the Raptors, now." Within seconds, the radio in the cockpit was rerouted. Echo's voice, calm and commanding, filled the line. "Viper, Ghost, this is Echo. Stand down and hold formation. That aircraft isn't random. It's here for me. If you engage, you'll trigger a response that kills everyone on this plane. Let me talk." For a long beat, there was only static. Then Viper's voice, tight with disbelief. "God, it really is you, after all these years." "It doesn't matter who I was," she replied. "What matters is what's about to happen. And if you don't trust me now, you'll lose more than this flight." Outside, the Raptors held position, weapons primed but waiting. The black aircraft hovered at a distance, its presence both threatening and patient, as though daring Echo to act. Inside, the passengers sat frozen, too terrified to move. Some still whispered, others prayed. The boy next to Echo clenched the armrest, eyes wide, watching her transform from an ordinary teenager into someone entirely different, someone who carried the weight of life and death in her voice. Echo stood tall in the aisle, the agents no longer pulling her down but watching, listening. For the first time, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was facing the past head-on, and as her words carried through the radio, through the cabin, through the night sky itself, the truth became undeniable. She was just a kid in seat 17A. But to the F-22 pilots, to the men in black, to the unknown enemies circling above, she was Echo. And Echo's name was powerful enough to change the course of the world.